Hello everyone, welcome to my channel, Breaking Bad Goddess. Today, the title of my video is A Tale of Two Cities, and I'm going to attempt to deconstruct Black Wall Street and position it against one of today's cities. It could have been any city in the United States, but I just decided to pick Detroit, Michigan as a city pitted against one of the most celebrated time periods for Black Americans in terms of our sovereignty, financially, economically, and really a self-sufficiency of a Black community that apparently doesn't seem to be recreated in any way currently. So for those who are not familiar with Black Wall Street, it was during the turn of the the early part of the 20th century, I would say the 1900s, in which Tulsa, Oklahoma had an enclave in Greenwood, I believe, Tulsa, Oklahoma, where there was a city where Black people were thriving financially. There were businesses, goods and services being traded. They had professionals of every stripe, lawyers, doctors, nurses, dentists, businessmen, banks, a real sufficient, very contained community among Black people. And unfortunately, the Tulsa race riots destroyed this community back in 1921, actually 100 years this year from Memorial Weekend. That the city was destroyed. And I talked to my father a lot about his childhood. He's 98, he'll be 99 next February. He was born in 1923 in Arkansas. And he recounted to me a story when he was a young boy about that time period in which his hometown had a parade every year for the Doughboys, who were World War I veterans of that time, World War I veterans. They referred to them as Doughboys at that time. And the way he tells me is during that time, if any Black person was around, especially after sunset, they would be found, beaten, and possibly lynched during that week celebration, or how long that celebration lasted. And then I'm thinking about that time period, and I know there was an era where there was referred to the Red Summer during that time, where throughout all of the United States, major cities were seized from white terrorists, the rise of the Ku Klux Klan, and just unprecedented lynchings and killings and destroying cities throughout the country during that time period. They referred to it as the Red Summer. And so I bring all this up because I want to paint a clear picture of what was going on during that time with Black Americans and the country, and how everything was against Black Americans at that time. There was no welfare, there was no type of safety net as far as food stamps, Section 8, no stimulus checks, nothing like that. Black people, if they were going to make it during that time, they had to make it on their own, completely on their own, and not to look for white America to help. If anything, they were doing more harm than help. And so that climate, in the midst of all that adversity, here lies a city in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in which is a thriving Black community. And I fast forward from that time period to now, and I picked Detroit, Michigan, because right now, Detroit, Michigan, from 2020 stats, is considered the #1 deadliest city in the United States. It is 19.5 per 1,000 violent crimes. And it has a poverty, the black residents of that city, about 37, almost 38%, live below the poverty line. And I'm thinking to myself, they're mirror images of each other, Black Wall Street and Detroit, in a sense that both eras lived through the best and worst of times. The best of times being a self-sufficient community in Black Wall Street, but in the midst of the worst times to be a Black person. And here, fast forward Detroit, again, not a great time to be alive in the city of Detroit, but yet you're in the midst of possibly the best time to be a Black American. More opportunities, advancements going on. We had our first Black president, had 60 years of the Civil Rights Act enacted, desegregation, in many ways hallmarks of an advancement of Black America that we've never seen since we've arrived in this country. Yet it's still the worst of times because of the unprecedented violence that's going on. And with all the talk of Black Wall Street, I wonder sometimes about any kind of deconstructing or discussion about what made Black Wall Street what it was. How that city and those people back then, how Black people at that time compared to Black people right now, what was so different? Why did Black Wall Street exist? And I think a lot of it is because they had no choice. There was no social safety net at the time. Everything was on them. And so they created an environment in which the community could thrive. First of all, Black marriages among Black people was higher than it is right now. Compared to Detroit, the head of the household, usually in Black Wall Street, turn of the century, was a Black male who worked, he provided, he problem solved, and he made sure there was provisions for his family. Whereas Detroit, Michigan, like the likelihood of the head of the household would be a single Black woman with children. And then you have the issue of, the city itself, where Black Wall Street pretty much monitored and controlled their own communities. They didn't let things get out of hand. They just didn't allow the community to descend into violence and chaos among its own citizen group of people. They policed their own. There was an unprecedented amount of violence and murders and killings and robberies compared to what's going on in Detroit right now. So those are two different things. Again, the best of times in the midst of the worst of times, but mirror images of these two cities in a period where you would think that things would really be bad for Black people, and they still managed to survive and thrive, rather. Whereas now, Black people are just basically surviving in the midst of a time where there's unprecedented advancement for Black people. So I wanted to turn the attention as to why Black America has lost any interest in recreating a Black Wall Street. From my point of view, I think they have. I think that there's talk of advancement, but through quick fixes like reparations. And I don't think reparations in and of itself is going to be the answer. It's a Band-Aid for a wound that has turned gangrenous. I think the issue of reparations would only work if the community was invested within the community. Right now, what we have is a few talented people, particularly Black men, who have obtained individually success and wealth, but are quick to export all that wealth and property to non-Black communities, leaving the Black community pretty desperate And I think with reparations, the money will be fielded right back into non-Black communities, because there seems to be no interest at this point for Black males to build a so-called Black Wall Street 2021, 2025, 2035. I don't think there is no interest. They like to talk about it and reminisce about Black Wall Street, but when it comes to recreating and actually pulling it off the way these Black men and women did back in 1920s, the 1915, I think just doesn't seem to be any interest, no movement, no serious movement going in that direction. And so, as always, my messaging is always going to be for Black women to move in a direction and where you can thrive. If the Black community is so worried about Black women leaving the community, then they should do whatever they can to make the community hospitable for Black women to thrive. And there's just no interest in that. It's evident in how they spend their money and where they spend their money. It's evident in who they decide to marry and who they don't decide to marry. And so what is left for Black women to do but leave? And the thing is, it's more important now for Black women to leave, because if people have been paying attention, these cities right now throughout the United States, a lot of these urban cities have grown to be more violent and more dangerous for Black women and children. Unprecedented violence. There's not a week that goes by where I don't see an article or hear about Black women and children being beaten, killed, harassed, shot down by the hands of Black males. It's scary. And I remember a few years ago, Kendall St. Charles had wrote an article. At that time, she had her Facebook up, and it was titled "The Bat Signal." And in the article, she talks about the walls coming up, and there was only a small window of opportunity for Black women to exit and get out before they can't get out. And I remember that article because it's damn near prophetic from what we're seeing right now. And I echo those sentiments because it seems to be coming to fruition. That more importantly for Black women to leave, because we have what I would say quite the antithesis of what Black Wall Street was. We're just living in a very dangerous time. It is the best of times to be a Black woman in a lot of ways. We are most highly educated. We have businesses. We are thriving. In many ways, we really drive the American economy. But at the same time, it's bad for us because of the violence and the turmoil and the inability for the community to rally and support Black women in any real way, because they're too preoccupied with deifying Black males. And so I caution Black women to leave because of pure survival. Really, to survive at this point. You can thrive and live elsewhere in another community, but to stay is just, at this point, suicidal, I believe. And so it's just some food for thought about what's going on in our community. It's some food for thought to, think about why I push this messaging more and more now than ever before, because I feel a sense of urgency to let Black women know that it really isn't a safe place anymore for them to stay, and to really not identify too much with what's going on in the Black community. To really, I talked about archetypes in my last video, and I press upon that even more, to adopt a different archetype, not to identify too much with what's going on in the Black community, because it really does lead to our detriment. It seems like every day, it seems that it's validated with all the killings and murders that's going on in the Black community. So it is in our best interest to move very carefully, quietly, and with stealth. Okay, that's it. Until next week, please leave a comment. I'd be interested in your input on this topic, and a rather sad commentary on the Black community in many ways, unfortunately, but a conversation that needs to be had. Thanks for watching.